My name is Beatrice, 65 years young, and recently retired after 30 years of teaching elementary school. Today should have been the happiest day of my life, watching my only son Samuel marry the woman he loves. But there was always something about Catherine that made me uneasy. Now, as I prepare to take my seat at the reception, Catherine approaches with a smile that doesn't reach her eyes. She pulls out my chair, but as I lower myself down, she yanks it away. I crash to the floor, pain shooting through my hip, as Catherine sneers, "Stay with the help where you belong." The room erupts in laughter until an older gentleman across the room stands up in shock. "Sir, is that you? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe." As I tell you how my son's wedding turned into a day I'll never forget. Before Catherine entered our lives, Samuel and I had the kind of relationship most mothers dream of having with their sons. After losing my husband James to cancer when Samuel was only 10, we became each other's rock. Those years weren't easy. Supporting us on a teacher's salary meant budget meals and second-hand clothes, but we were happy. Samuel grew into a compassionate, intelligent young man who never forgot where he came from, even after his success as a software engineer at a prestigious tech company. I remember the Sunday dinners we'd have every week, without fail. Samuel would bring groceries, and we'd cook together, laughing and sharing stories about our week. "Mom," he'd say, "your lasagna could put 5-star restaurants out of business." Those simple moments were priceless to me. Everything changed 3 years ago when Samuel met Catherine at a charity gala his company was sponsoring. She was stunning, tall, elegantly dressed, with perfect blonde hair and the kind of confidence that commanded attention. Samuel was smitten immediately. When he first brought her home to meet me, I noticed how she scanned my modest living room, her smile tightening almost imperceptibly when she saw my worn but comfortable furniture. "Your home is so quaint," she said, in a tone that made the word sound like an insult rather than a compliment. I brushed it off. First impressions can be misleading, and I wanted to like the woman my son had fallen for. Catherine spoke of her father being a successful businessman who had connections with several Fortune 500 companies. She dropped names of celebrities she claimed to know personally and vacation spots that I could only dream of visiting. Samuel looked at her with such admiration during these stories, clearly impressed by her worldliness and social standing. But there were moments when Samuel stepped out of the room that I saw glimpses of someone else entirely. The warm smile would vanish, replaced by cold calculation. Once when I offered her a homemade cookie, she looked at it like I'd handed her dirt. "I don't eat processed sugar or flour," she said curtly. "They cause inflammation and aging." I later found out she'd eaten an entire slice of chocolate cake at a restaurant with Samuel the night before. As their relationship progressed, I noticed more red flags. Catherine would correct my grammar or interrupt me mid-sentence. She'd make subtle comments about my appearance. "Those wrinkles around your eyes really show up in this lighting." Or, "That style went out of fashion years ago, but I suppose it works for women your age." Samuel never noticed these interactions. Catherine was careful to be the perfect girlfriend whenever he was present, touching his arm affectionately, laughing at his jokes, asking about his work. He was blinded by love, and I didn't want to be the mother who couldn't accept that her son had found someone. What I didn't know then was that Catherine's background wasn't what she claimed. Her family had indeed been wealthy once, but they had lost everything in a financial scandal years ago. She had carefully constructed a facade to hide her past, presenting herself as the daughter of a still successful businessman, rather than someone who had experienced a dramatic fall from grace. I tried my best to embrace Catherine, inviting her to family gatherings, asking about her interests, even offering to teach her some of Samuel's favorite recipes. My efforts were met with polite dismissal, at best thinly veiled contempt, at worst. Still, I persisted believing that if I showed her enough kindness, she would eventually warm up to me. Give her time, my sister Angela advised when I confided my concerns. Some people take longer to let their guard down. So I kept quiet. I smiled through the insults, disguised as helpful advice. I accepted being increasingly sidelined in my son's life. I told myself it was worth it to see Samuel happy, even when he started missing our weekly dinners because Catherine had made other plans. I swallowed my disappointment. When Samuel called to announce their engagement after just 18 months of dating, I feigned the enthusiasm he expected. "I'm so happy for you both," I said, ignoring the knot in my stomach. I never imagined that my silence would lead to disaster on what should have been the most joyous day of my son's life. I never dreamed that by not speaking up sooner, I was setting myself up for public humiliation, and my son for heartbreak. I couldn't have known that my kindness toward a stranger years ago would come back in the most unexpected way. I didn't know that my decision to stay quiet would lead to the most painful and yet ultimately liberating moment of my life. The engagement party was my first glimpse of what the wedding planning process would be like. Catherine's parents weren't present. She claimed her father was on an important business trip overseas, and her mother was visiting a sick relative. Looking back, I should have recognized this as another carefully constructed lie. Samuel and I had always talked about his future wedding. He had mentioned wanting to incorporate some family traditions, like having the ceremony in our local church, where he was baptized using my mother's antique cake knife and playing his father's favorite song for one of the dances. I'd kept my husband's wedding ring, hoping that one day Samuel might want to use it or melt it down to create something new for his bride. None of that happened. Catherine hired an exclusive wedding planner who took control of every detail. The venue she selected was an upscale hotel in the city, about 2 hours from my home. When I tentatively mentioned the church, Catherine laughed. "No offense, Beatrice, but that little church is hardly suitable for the kind of wedding we're planning. Besides, I've already put a deposit on the grand ballroom." She never consulted me on anything, though she made a show of asking my opinion, only to immediately dismiss it. "What do you think of these flowers, Beatrice?" "No, never mind, they're too provincial. We need something more sophisticated." I watched Samuel change as the wedding approached. My thoughtful son, who once called me every day, now went weeks without checking in. When I reached out to him, his responses were brief and distracted. Catherine had become the center of his world, and I was increasingly pushed to the periphery. When I offered to contribute financially to the wedding I'd been saving for Samuel's future for years, Catherine responded with barely concealed disdain. "That's sweet but unnecessary. We want the best of everything, and well..." She glanced around my living room again and, "We wouldn't want to burden you." The implication was clear. My contribution would be insignificant compared to what they were spending. What she didn't know was that despite my modest lifestyle, I had managed to save a considerable amount over the years. But rather than correct her assumption, I nodded and changed the subject, swallowing my pride once again. As the wedding day approached, Catherine's comments about my appearance became more frequent and cutting. During the one bridal shop appointment I was invited to, she suggested I look for a slimming mother-of-the-groom dress. "Something to minimize those problem areas," she said, gesturing vaguely toward my midsection. "And maybe something that covers your arms. Women your age shouldn't show too much skin." I caught the saleswoman's sympathetic glance, but forced a smile. "I'll keep that in mind," I replied, though inside I was crushed. I had actually lost weight and felt good about myself before that appointment. The worst moment came during the rehearsal dinner. I had spent hours preparing a heartfelt toast for my son and his bride-to-be, carefully writing and rewriting my speech to strike the perfect balance between sentimental and uplifting. But when the time came for toasts, the wedding planner, clearly instructed by Catherine, skipped over me entirely. When I quietly asked about it afterward, Catherine said, Oh, we had to cut some things to stay on schedule. But don't worry, no one really expected you to speak anyway. Samuel, deep in conversation with Catherine's friends, didn't even notice what had happened. The distance between us had grown so vast that my own son couldn't see when I was hurt. The boy who once rushed to my side when I cut my finger cooking dinner now couldn't recognize the pain in his mother's eyes. That night in my hotel room, I cried for the first time in years. I questioned whether I had failed as a mother, whether I should have done something differently. I even considered not attending the wedding at all, claiming illness to spare myself further humiliation. But in the morning, I pushed those thoughts aside. This was my son's wedding day, and I would be there with a smile on my face no matter what. I applied my makeup carefully, put on the navy blue dress I'd chosen, despite Catherine's suggestions, and headed to the ceremony with renewed determination to make the best of things. Things will get better after the wedding, I told myself. Once they're married, the stress will be gone, and Catherine will relax. We'll find common ground as family. I couldn't have been more wrong. The nightmare was only beginning, and the wedding day would bring a public humiliation beyond anything I had imagined. But it would also bring an unexpected reckoning that would change everything. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect September day. I had expected to be included in the pre-ceremony preparations, helping Samuel with his tie, sharing a quiet moment with my son before he took this monumental step. Instead, I received a text from him. "Morning, Mom. Really busy with photographer and stuff. See you at ceremony." I sat alone in my hotel room, scrolling through old photos of Samuel as a little boy, as a teenager, as the young man who graduated college with honors. In every milestone of his life, I had been there front and center. Until now. When I arrived at the venue, I was directed to my seat by an usher who consulted his list with a frown. "Mrs. Patterson, you're in row 5 outside aisle." Not the front row, where the mother of the groom traditionally sits, row 5 behind Catherine's extended family college friends and what appeared to be her father's business associates. I took my assigned seat without complaint, though the mother of one of Samuel's friends noticed and raised her eyebrows in surprise. The ballroom was transformed into a wonderland of white orchids, crystal chandeliers, and silk draperies. Everything screamed expensive taste and meticulous planning. I estimated the flowers alone must have cost more than 3 months of my pension. The ceremony was beautiful, despite my disappointment. Samuel looked handsome in his tuxedo, his face glowing with happiness as Catherine walked down the aisle in a gown that probably cost more than my car. I cried, of course. My baby was getting married, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching from a distance, like a stranger, rather than the woman who had raised him. During the vows, Catherine spoke about finding her soulmate and building a future together. Not once did she mention becoming part of our family or acknowledge the life and values Samuel had before meeting her. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the room erupted in applause. I clapped until my hands hurt, determined to show my support despite everything. At the reception, I discovered I was seated at a table far from the main wedding party with distant relatives of Catherine's, whom I'd never met. One elderly woman leaned over and whispered, "Aren't you the groom's mother? Why aren't you at the head table?" I mumbled something about space limitations, too embarrassed to admit I didn't know the answer myself. Throughout the dinner, I watched Samuel and Catherine at the center table, surrounded by her bridesmaids and his groomsmen. They looked happy, and I tried to focus on that rather than my own feelings of exclusion. I barely touched my food, my appetite diminished by the knot of hurt in my stomach. When it came time for speeches, Catherine's maid of honor gave a gushing tribute to their friendship. Samuel's best friend recounted amusing stories from their college days. Catherine's father, a distinguished-looking man with silver hair and an expensive suit, spoke briefly about welcoming Samuel to the family. Not once was I mentioned or acknowledged. It was as if Samuel had materialized as an adult, with no past, no mother, who had sacrificed and loved him for 30 years. After the speeches and first dance, I saw Catherine whisper something to Samuel, who nodded and continued chatting with his friends. She made her way through the crowd, stopping to accept compliments and exchange air kisses with guests. When she reached my table, she wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Beatrice," she said loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "you look so lonely over here. Why don't you come sit with us at the main table for a bit?" For a moment, my heart lifted. Was this an olive branch, a genuine attempt to include me? The guests at my table smiled encouragingly, and I stood up, smoothing my dress nervously. "That's very kind of you, Catherine." "Thank you." I followed her to the head table, aware of eyes tracking our movement across the room. There was an empty chair beside Samuel, and Catherine gestured toward it with a flourish. "Here you go," she said brightly. Relief and gratitude washed over me. Perhaps I had misjudged her. Perhaps the stress of wedding planning had brought out the worst in her. And now that they were married, things would improve. I turned to lower myself into the chair, my heart lighter than it had been all day. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As I began to sit, Catherine smoothly pulled the chair backward. There was a moment of confusion as I realized what was happening. But by then, my balance was already compromised. I fell backward, landing hard on the ballroom floor, a sharp pain shooting through my tailbone and hip. The sound of laughter filled the air as Catherine looked down at me with undisguised contempt. "Oops," she said, not bothering to help me up. "I guess you should stay with the help where you belong." More laughter followed, though some guests looked uncomfortable. Samuel, engaged in conversation at the other end of the table, hadn't even noticed what had happened. I lay there, pain radiating through my body, but the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the humiliation burning through me. A server rushed forward to help me up his face, a mask of professional neutrality, though his eyes held sympathy. As he assisted me to my feet, I heard a chair scrape loudly against the floor at a nearby table. An older gentleman had stood up abruptly, his face pale as he stared at me in disbelief. "Good Lord," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quieting room. "Beatrice, is that really you?" Leaning heavily on the server's arm, pain still throbbing in my hip, I turned toward the voice. Through tears of humiliation, I struggled to focus on his face. He seemed vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place him. "Sir," I managed to say, my voice trembling. The room fell silent as the man made his way toward me, the guests' attention now fully captured by this unexpected development. Catherine stood frozen, her triumphant smile fading as she glanced between me and the approaching man, her father. "William," I gasped recognition, finally dawning as he drew closer. William Anderson. I hadn't seen him in over 20 years, but the moment our eyes met, a flood of memories returned. "It is you," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Beatrice Patterson. I can't believe it." The elegant silver-haired man standing before me bore little resemblance to the disheveled, desperate soul I'd met all those years ago. But the eyes were the same, kind eyes that had once been clouded by despair, now clear and filled with shock. Catherine stepped between us, her composure slightly fractured. "Daddy, you know this woman." William gently moved his daughter aside, his focus entirely on me. "Know her." "My dear, this woman saved my life." A murmur rippled through the wedding guests. Samuel had finally noticed the commotion and was hurrying toward us, confusion written across his face. "Mom, are you okay? What happened?" Before I could answer, William turned to the room at large, his voice strong and clear. 23 years ago, I lost everything. My business collapsed under a mountain of debt. My wife left me taking most of our remaining assets. I spiraled into depression and alcoholism, eventually finding myself homeless on the streets of Boston. Catherine's face had drained of color. She gripped the back of a chair so tightly, her knuckles turned white. William continued. One winter night, I was huddled in a doorway, half frozen, and having not eaten in days. This woman, he gestured to me, was leaving the school where she taught. Instead of walking past like everyone else, she stopped. She bought me a hot meal, then returned with blankets. The next day she came back, and the day after that. Tears welled in my eyes as I remembered those days. William had been so broken, so lost. I couldn't bear to see another human being suffering when I had the means to help, however modest. Beatrice didn't just provide temporary relief, William went on. She helped me find a shelter, connected me with addiction services, even helped me update my resume. When I mentioned my background in finance, she introduced me to her brother-in-law, who ran a small accounting firm. That job was my first step back. Samuel was looking between us in astonishment. "Mom, you never told me any of this." "It wasn't something I felt needed mentioning," I said softly. "Anyone would have done the same." "No, Beatrice," William said firmly. "Not anyone would have done what you did. Most people walked past without a second glance. You saw a human being worth saving when I couldn't even see it myself." He turned to Catherine, whose face had transformed from shock to something closer to horror. "Catherine, is this the woman you've been complaining about? Your mother-in-law, the one you said was beneath your social circle?" A gasp went through the room. Samuel's expression hardened as he turned to his new wife. "What is he talking about, Catherine?" Catherine's carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. She attempted to regain control of the situation. "Daddy, you must be confused. This can't be the same person." "I'm not confused," William replied, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "I would recognize Beatrice anywhere. Her kindness is the reason I'm alive today, the reason I was able to rebuild my life and eventually provide for you again." He looked around the opulent ballroom, taking in the expensive decorations and fine china. "All of this, the lifestyle you've grown up with after our family's recovery, the education you received, it exists in part because of this woman's compassion." The room had fallen completely silent. Even the waitstaff had paused in their duties, transfixed by the unfolding drama. Catherine's facade finally cracked entirely. "I didn't know," she whispered, though whether she was referring to my connection to her father or his past was unclear. Samuel's voice cut through the silence, cold and controlled. "Did you pull my mother's chair away? Did you deliberately make her fall?" Catherine flinched at his tone. Several guests who had witnessed the incident shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The woman at the table next to ours spoke up. "She did, and then she said something about staying with the help." Samuel's face flushed with anger. "My mother, who raised me alone after Dad died, who worked 2 jobs sometimes to make sure I could go to college, you humiliated her at our wedding." "Samuel, Catherine began, but he cut her off. "And all this time you've been treating her like she's beneath you when she's the reason your family recovered from bankruptcy." William looked stricken. "Catherine Alexandria Anderson, is this true? Have you been mistreating Beatrice?" Catherine's composure shattered completely. Tears streaked her perfect makeup as she looked frantically between her father and her new husband. "You don't understand," she said desperately. "After everything we went through, the humiliation, the whispers, I promised myself I'd never go back to that life. I've worked so hard to build this image to be someone people respect." "Respect isn't something you buy with fancy clothes and expensive parties," I said quietly, finding my voice at last. "It's something you earn through your actions and the way you treat others." The room seemed to hold its breath. In that moment, the balance of power had shifted completely. I was no longer the unwanted mother-in-law, to be tolerated and marginalized. I was standing in my truth, supported by an unexpected ally who had known me at my most authentic, when I had reached out to help without expectation of return or recognition. Catherine looked around the room, seeing the judgment in the guests' eyes, the disappointment in her father's face, and the cold anger in her new husband's expression. Her carefully constructed world had been turned upside down in the space of minutes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the words sounded hollow, born more from being caught than from genuine remorse. As I stood there, still aching from my fall, but somehow feeling stronger than I had in years, I realized that sometimes the most painful moments can become unexpected turning points. Sometimes it takes falling to the ground to finally stand up for yourself. The aftermath was immediate and intense. Guests began whispering among themselves, some openly staring at Catherine with disapproval. Samuel, still processing everything he'd heard, turned to me with concern and guilt in his eyes. "Mom, are you hurt? Do you need a doctor?" The pain in my hip was significant, but I shook my head. "I'll be all right. Just bruised, I think." William insisted on helping me to a comfortable chair in a quieter corner of the ballroom, while Samuel confronted Catherine more privately, though their tense body language was visible to everyone. "I can't believe this is happening," one of Catherine's bridesmaids muttered to another as they passed by. "This is like something out of a movie." The wedding coordinator hovered anxiously, clearly at a loss for how to proceed with the reception. The band had stopped playing, and the dance floor remained empty as the drama continued to unfold. Catherine, her perfect composure completely shattered, attempted damage control. She approached where I sat with William Samuel, following close behind his expression still hard with anger. "Beatrice," she began, her voice wavering, "I want to apologize for what happened. It was just a joke that went too far." "A joke?" Samuel interrupted incredulously. "You humiliated my mother in front of everyone and called it a joke." Catherine flinched. "I didn't mean—" "Don't," William said firmly. "Don't make it worse by lying. I raised you better than this, Catherine. At least I thought I did." Catherine's face crumpled. For the first time I saw beyond her perfect exterior to the insecure woman beneath. "After we lost everything," she said quietly, "the way people looked at us, the way my friends abandoned me, I swore I'd never be on the receiving end of that kind of pity again. I reinvented myself. I buried that past so deep, I almost convinced myself it never happened." "And that justified treating my mother like she was beneath you?" Samuel demanded. Catherine shook her head, tears flowing freely now. "No, nothing justifies that. I was wrong, terribly wrong." She turned to me, meeting my eyes directly, for perhaps the first time. "Beatrice, I'm truly sorry. Not just for today, but for everything. For every dismissive comment, every time I made you feel unwelcome or unimportant." I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd grown accustomed to. Instead, I saw genuine shame and regret. Whether it was because she truly understood the hurt she'd caused, or simply because she'd been exposed, didn't matter in that moment. "Catherine," I said slowly, "I have always wanted to welcome you into our family. From the first day Samuel brought you home, all I wanted was to love you as a daughter. But you need to understand, respect is a two-way street. I deserved better than how you treated me." Several guests nearby nodded in agreement, no longer bothering to pretend they weren't listening. William put a gentle hand on Catherine's shoulder. "You've forgotten where you came from, Catherine. You've forgotten what it was like to be vulnerable, to need kindness from strangers." "I wanted to forget," she whispered. "And in doing so, you became exactly the kind of person who looked down on us when we were at our lowest." William said, his voice tinged with disappointment. The kind of person who judges others based on their bank account or social status rather than their character. Catherine's shoulders slumped as the truth of her father's words sank in. Samuel, who had been watching this exchange with a mixture of anger and confusion, finally spoke up. "Why didn't either of you tell me about this, Mom? Why didn't you tell me you helped Catherine's father? And Catherine, why did you hide your past from me?" William answered first. Beatrice likely didn't mention it because that's who she is, someone who helps without seeking recognition or gratitude. As for Catherine, he glanced at his daughter with a mixture of love and disappointment. "I was ashamed," Catherine admitted. "I wanted you to think I came from perfect stability and success. I was afraid if you knew the truth, that I wouldn't love you." Samuel shook his head in disbelief. "Did you really think so little of me?" A middle-aged woman who had been sitting at my original table approached our group. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to say something to you, Beatrice. What happened to you today was appalling, and how you're handling it now with such dignity and grace, it's remarkable." Others joined in with similar sentiments, forming a small circle of support around me. For the first time that day, I felt seen and valued. I decided it was time to take control of the situation. Despite the pain in my hip, I stood up, straightening my back and lifting my chin. The room gradually fell silent as people noticed my movement. "I appreciate everyone's concern," I began, my teacher's voice projecting clearly across the ballroom. "This day is meant to be a celebration of Samuel and Catherine's marriage. While what happened was unfortunate, I don't want it to define this day." Catherine looked up at me in surprise. "That said," I continued, "I want to be clear about something. Forgiveness doesn't mean allowing yourself to be mistreated. It means releasing the anger so it doesn't consume you while still maintaining healthy boundaries." I turned to Catherine directly. "I forgive you, Catherine. Not for your sake, but for mine. Because holding on to resentment would only poison my own heart. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending this didn't happen or that it wasn't part of a pattern." I shifted my gaze to Samuel, whose eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Samuel, I raised you to be a man of integrity and compassion. I know you love Catherine, and I respect that, but love shouldn't come at the expense of respect, for yourself or for those who have always been there for you." Finally, I addressed the room at large. "To everyone here today, thank you for your support. If there's a lesson in what happened, perhaps it's this: true worth isn't measured by social status or material possessions. It's measured by how we treat others, especially those we perceive as having less power or influence than ourselves." A spontaneous round of applause broke out. William nodded in approval, while Samuel looked at me with newfound respect. Catherine remained silent, her eyes downcast. As the applause died down, I added one final thought. "I'm not a victim here. I'm a survivor, and I refuse to let anyone else define my worth or dictate how I should be treated. Not anymore." With those words, I reclaimed my power in a way I hadn't done in years, perhaps ever. In that moment, I wasn't just Samuel's mother or the woman who had been humiliated. I was Beatrice Patterson, standing in my own strength, refusing to be diminished by anyone. As I returned to my seat, accepting the supportive touches and words of encouragement from guests, I caught William's eye. He smiled sadly and mouthed two simple words: "Thank you." Not just for what I'd done for him all those years ago, I realized, but for what I'd just done for his daughter, showing her through my example what real strength and dignity looked like. The rest of the reception continued in a subdued manner. The band eventually resumed playing, and some guests made their way to the dance floor, though the carefree celebration that typically characterizes weddings had been irreparably altered. Samuel and Catherine decided to cancel their grand exit and the elaborate after-party that had been planned. Instead, they quietly informed close family and friends that they would be postponing their honeymoon to sort some things out. The whispered explanation circulated quickly through the remaining guests. I spent the remainder of the evening receiving a steady stream of well-wishers, many of whom shared their own stories of difficult in-laws or family conflicts. It was strange to suddenly be the center of attention at my son's wedding, though not in the way I would have ever wanted. William stayed close by, filling in more details about his life after I'd helped him. He had indeed rebuilt his financial consulting business, though on a smaller, more ethical scale. He had remarried a kind woman who had unfortunately passed away from cancer 5 years earlier. We discovered many common interests and perspectives, the easy conversation a balm to my wounded spirit. As the night wound down, Samuel approached me again, this time alone. His face showed the strain of the day, the joy of his wedding morning replaced by a profound weariness. "Mom, I need to talk to you and Catherine together. Would you mind coming to our suite in about an hour? I think we have a lot to discuss." I agreed, though anxiety fluttered in my stomach at the prospect of a confrontation. After saying goodbye to William, who promised to call me in the coming days, I made my way to my own room to freshen up and collect my thoughts. The meeting in Samuel and Catherine's suite was initially tense and awkward. Catherine had removed her elaborate wedding gown and sat in hotel bathrobe, her face scrubbed clean of makeup, looking younger and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. Samuel began by apologizing to me. "Mom, I'm so sorry I didn't see what was happening. I was so caught up in my relationship with Catherine that I missed how she was treating you. I should have protected you better." "It wasn't your responsibility to protect me," I replied gently, "but thank you for acknowledging it now." Catherine spoke next, her voice thick with emotion. "Beatrice, what I did was unforgivable. Not just today, but for the past 3 years. I've been horrible to you." "Why?" I asked simply. "What did I ever do to deserve such treatment?" She took a deep, shuddering breath. "It wasn't about you, not really. When I met Samuel, he talked about you with such admiration, such love. The relationship you have. I never had that with my mother, even before our family's financial troubles. She was always distant, critical. When she left my father during our lowest point, she left me too." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I was jealous, so jealous of the bond you and Samuel share. And then when I found out about your modest lifestyle, your career as a teacher, it reminded me of everything I'd tried to escape. The years when we had nothing, when I wore second-hand clothes and was mocked by my former friends. So you tried to push me away," I said, understanding dawning, "to create distance between Samuel and me." She nodded miserably. "And I looked down on you to convince myself I was better, that I had truly escaped my past. It was cruel and shallow, and I'm deeply ashamed." Samuel took Catherine's hand, but addressed me. "Mom, I want you to know that things will change. I've made that clear to Catherine. Our relationship can only continue if she treats you with the respect you deserve." Catherine nodded earnestly. "I understand that I have a lot to make up for and that trust won't be rebuilt overnight. But I want to try if you'll give me the chance." I considered her words carefully. The hurt she had caused was real and deep. And yet I could see in her eyes that same vulnerable humanity I had recognized in her father all those years ago. "I believe in second chances," I said finally. "I gave one to your father when he needed it most. I'm willing to give you one too. But Catherine, I need you to understand something important." She looked up, meeting my gaze. "I have spent too much of my life being accommodating, swallowing my hurt to keep the peace. That ends today. I will be kind to you because that's who I choose to be, but I will also expect to be treated with respect. I will speak up when something bothers me. I will not be sidelined in my son's life any longer. Samuel squeezed my hand gratefully. I understand, Catherine said quietly. And you're right. You deserve nothing less. We talked for hours that night, clearing the air and setting new expectations for our family dynamic moving forward. There were more tears from all of us, but also moments of surprising connection and even a few hesitant laughs. As I finally returned to my own room in the early hours of the morning, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel after such a tumultuous day. Hope. Not naive optimism that everything would magically be perfect, but a grounded hope based on truth finally spoken aloud and boundaries clearly established. My relationship with Catherine would never be simple or easy. There was too much history, too much hurt for that. But for the first time we were interacting as authentic human beings rather than through masks and pretenses. It was a beginning, tentative and fragile, but real. And perhaps most importantly, I had found my voice again. The fall that was meant to humiliate me had instead become the catalyst for my rising. Sometimes we need to hit the ground before we can truly stand tall. As I drifted off to sleep, my last thought was of William's face when he recognized me. Some kindnesses echo through time in ways we could never predict, touching lives in circles that expand beyond our imagination. We never know how the compassion we show today might return to us tomorrow, often when we need it most. 6 months have passed since that wedding day that changed everything. The bruise on my hip faded long ago, but the impact of what happened continues to ripple through all our lives in unexpected ways. Samuel and Catherine did eventually take their honeymoon, though it was a much simpler trip than originally planned. They spent 2 weeks at a quiet cottage by the lake, rather than the extravagant European tour Catherine had envisioned. Samuel later told me it was Catherine's idea to scale back a small but significant sign that her priorities were shifting. Their marriage has not been easy. There have been arguments and difficult adjustments as they navigate their new reality. They're seeing a marriage counselor weekly, learning to communicate more honestly, and work through the cracks in their foundation that were revealed so dramatically at their wedding. Catherine is different now. The perfectly polished facade has softened. She dresses more simply, speaks more directly. During our monthly dinners, yes, we now have regular family meals together, she sometimes shares stories from her childhood, both the privileged early years and the difficult times that followed her family's financial collapse. Each revelation is a small gift of trust, a tentative step toward authentic connection. She's also working through her complicated relationship with her father. William has become a regular presence in our lives, joining us for dinner every few weeks. Watching Catherine and William rebuild their relationship has been both heartwarming and painful. There's so much unresolved hurt between them, so many years of pretending that have left scars on them both. As for William and me, we've developed a friendship that surprised us both. What began as gratitude and shared concern for our children has evolved into something more. We started with coffee after those family dinners, which led to museum visits, long walks, and eventually proper dates. At 65 and 70, we're taking things slowly. But there's a gentle joy in discovering companionship at this stage of life. Who would have thought that the homeless man I helped all those years ago would one day hold my hand as we watched the sunset? My relationship with Samuel has healed as well. He's made a conscious effort to reconnect with me, to rebuild the closeness we once had. He calls regularly, stops by unexpectedly with coffee, asks my advice about things both important and trivial. The distance that Catherine had carefully cultivated between us has dissolved, replaced by a mature relationship that acknowledges our history while creating space for his marriage. Perhaps the most significant change has been within myself. After the wedding, I joined a support group for older women who have experienced emotional abuse or manipulation. Listening to their stories and sharing my own has been incredibly healing. Many of these women have become dear friends, and together we've learned to recognize our own worth independent of how others treat us. I've also started volunteering at the same shelter where I once brought William. Twice a week I serve meals and offer whatever practical assistance I can to people experiencing homelessness. Each person I meet reminds me of the fundamental truth that we are all vulnerable, all capable of both falling and rising again. Catherine visits the shelter sometimes too. The first time she came, she was visibly uncomfortable, her designer clothes and manicured nails marking her as an outsider. But she kept coming back gradually, becoming more at ease. Last week, I overheard her talking with a young woman who had fled an abusive relationship, sharing her own experience of rebuilding after loss. The genuine compassion in her voice brought tears to my eyes. None of us are the same people we were 6 months ago. The public humiliation that I thought would destroy me instead became the catalyst for growth and authentic connection. Catherine, who tried so hard to present a perfect image to the world, is learning that her value doesn't come from appearances or social status. Samuel, who was caught between two women he loved, has found a way to honor both relationships while setting healthy boundaries. The most profound lesson I've learned through all of this is that our true strength isn't measured by never falling. It's measured by how we rise after we fall, by the courage it takes to look at painful truths and still choose compassion for others and for ourselves. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing harmful behavior. It means releasing the hold that behavior has on your heart and mind. I've forgiven Catherine not because she deserves it, but because I deserve peace. I've established clear boundaries, not from a place of anger, but from self-respect. Every day I'm learning to speak my truth gently but firmly, to take up space in the world without apology, to recognize that my worth isn't determined by others' perceptions or treatment of me. Sometimes I think about that moment when I hit the floor at the wedding, the laughter that followed the burning shame I felt. It still stings, but the pain has transformed into something else. A reminder of my resilience, of the unexpected ways grace can enter our lives, even in our lowest moments. If you're going through something similar, feeling diminished, sidelined, or devalued by someone in your life, please know that you deserve better. Your worth isn't up for debate. Your voice matters. And sometimes the fall that seems like it will break you instead becomes the very thing that sets you free. I'd love to hear your stories of resilience and transformation in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a painful moment that ultimately led to positive change? What boundaries have you established in your relationships that have brought you peace? Share your journey. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story of strength and healing. Thank you for walking this path with me. Your support means more than you know.